If you're a really good leader, it is a lonely place to be because you're driving so many layers in a company towards a good goal or a good mission or a good vision. And that's indeed a difficult one to talk to. And I've been looking for years to find counterparts to have these conversations. And I've noticed that indeed in this podcast, there's a lot of people that I talk to whom I will be contacting again just to have those conversations, because it's sometimes you miss the little differences in point of view where when you ask the questions. Let me invite you to sit back, drop your jaw, tongue and shoulders, take a deep breath, and if you wish, close your eyes for a moment and feel the beat within. In a few seconds, you just jumped from your head to your heart and felt the beat within, opening up to receive even more value and fulfillment out of your business and life. And today's episode, I'm your host, Nico van der Venne, confidant to successful CEO founders, entrepreneurs who are striving to achieve everlasting fulfillment. Welcome to the Everlasting Fulfillment Podcast with our next guest, Robert White. Robert's passions for many years has been exposing individuals to high-impact experiential learning events and the transformation possibilities that includes. There have been over 1 million graduates from the companies he founded and led doing that work. Today, his passion is bringing those experiences to owners, entrepreneurs, and executives of organizations, for profit and non-profit. His mentoring role is supported by a best-selling book and an award-winning audio program with Nightingale Conant. In many ways, living out that vision has impacted Robert both professionally and personally. Welcome to the show, Robert. It's amazing to have you. Somebody with so much experience. It must be amazing to be you.
Sometimes I have that experience, and unfortunately, not always. But thank you, Nico. It's wonderful to be with you and with your listeners.
Cool. So we read here that you are supported by a book. Which book is that exactly then?
My first experience was one that most people don't know very much about, but I published a book called One World, One People, which is a photographic essay done by this very gifted Japanese photographer, Yoshiaki Nagashima. And I wrote the 7 essays that are part of the book, dividing up the sections of the book. It's a coffee table book. It's huge. And when I worked so hard on it, then I learned that nobody reads the essays in a photographic journal. But my book, that's now a bestseller in English and in Mandarin and in traditional Chinese, and later this year in Spanish, is called Living an Extraordinary Life. It's what I learned. Actually, for 20 years, people suggested that I write the book. And I said no in many creative ways, many excuses. I became quite practiced at the excuses. The biggest one was that you can't do an experience in a book, that was my belief and also my excuse. And I later learned that's not true, that if people have a certain amount of readiness, they can have an experience from a book, and including mine. And I have many reports from people that it's been life-changing. That blew that up. So after 20 years, I got embarrassed into writing it because of the success of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits book.
Okay.
And, where our graduates were coming to me and telling me that they were going to go do the Stephen Covey leadership work because they had read the book. Mm-hmm. And I went, Oops, I've missed something here. And so I did the work, and the book's been a delight. It's not about me. That's a common thing that people wonder about. I think in some ways my life has been extraordinary, in other ways very ordinary. But the book's about the interaction between our participants, now at over 1,300,000, and our material. So it's a lot of stories around a framework of developing a higher level of awareness, taking personal responsibility for your life, and learning a certain level of mastery in all forms of communication. But it's people's stories that really bring the book alive and what people often comment on.
Yeah, I could imagine. To be honest, I don't want to spoil anything, but I actually had the first epiphany by doing the Covey session where, the recording where they take you through your own funeral. I opened up my eyes, which was radical at the time. I think I'm talking maybe 20 years ago, something like that. but it did change my life absolutely. And it's something that triggered within me is taking that responsibility, like you say, like you've also integrated into your book. Now, if you yourself look at your life, what kind of points in life did you say, okay, this needs to be taken on as a responsibility by myself because nobody else might take it on or anything like that?
I've lived long enough, I guess, that in talking about my story and about the past, what I tend to do recently is to look for choice points or significant turning points in my life. For me, the first one was that I was 12 years old and won a writing contest for our town. And the prize, first of all, was a bicycle, and with all of the accoutrement. It was really a nice bicycle, and we were living in poverty, so the bicycle was really a big deal. But the other thing was, I didn't understand it, but they said, we're going to put you on the radio, on the morning radio, and you're going to read part of what you wrote. And I had no idea what that meant, but a teacher accompanied me, took me to a radio station. And the first thing that happened for me was I fell in love with the space, with all of that wonderful equipment, with the magic of an announcer sitting alone in a booth and yet reaching thousands and thousands of people. Just everything about it just woke me up. And I asked on the way out, I asked, is there any way to come back and just observe what they're doing? And they said, no. I'm shortening the conversation, but they said no, that their insurance would not allow that.
Okay.
And I was very disappointed, as a 12-year-old can be. And on my way out, the receptionist stopped me and she said, I overheard the conversation. Our competitor down the street has a different setup where their lobby has glass walls and you can look in on the operations at any time, 24 hours a day. And there's a speaker in that hallway and you can hear what's going on in the station. Nico, it could sound crazy, but for 2 years, almost every Saturday, I went to that station and just hung out in the lobby.
Wow.
And watch. You could look in on the actual announcer, the DJ. You could look in on the control room where they put it all together, and you could look in on the marketing department and the AR guy, the artist and repertoire people, and the thousands of pieces of music there. But that was how I spent my Saturdays, and for 2 years. And then that led to, they had a labor dispute and they fired all of their control engineers in one day, which meant the announcers had to, it's called running your own board, which is really a challenging thing. So they reached out to my school and found me. And so I went to work at 14 in radio. So that was a turning point for me, and in many ways, and primarily around self-esteem and being valued, being paid, receiving praise from people that I respected. And by the time I was 17, I was on the air. I had the #1 rated radio show in the state of Wisconsin. And because I was talking to my friends, my peer group, right? Because in those years, nights and weekends in radio belonged to teenagers because of the music. And I made more money that year than my father had ever made, and was named most likely to succeed by my classmates, and things were pretty great. I spent the next 10 years, and so this takes the next turning point, which was exactly 10 years at 27. By that time, I had completely made my parents wrong and made my classmates wrong. The most likely to succeed guy, I had an early marriage that failed. I felt horribly guilty about it. I'm a guy, right? I don't talk about it, but that dominated my thinking. I had a health problem. I had 3 heart attacks at 19, 21, and 23 years. I had chest pain every day. I'd been told I would die by 35. There was nothing they could do. So that was also something that I kept secret, but bothered me a lot. I lied about it a lot. That's not good for the soul.
No.
And I later learned. And my little sales business was failing. And a friend of mine went out to California and did one of the early human potential movement trainings called Mind Dynamics MDI. And he came back raving about it. And then he told me about it. And I said, no way I'm going to this crazy California seminar, especially in those days. It didn't have a good reputation in the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. But in 6 months, he kept talking to me about it. And I saw his life turn around in a positive direction. And we were in similar businesses, and he was doing a lot better than I was. I finally went there with arms crossed, probably eyes crossed, legs crossed, cynical, disbelieving, but I couldn't argue with the results I saw in him. Mm-hmm. And Nico, it's a cliche all these years later, but it changed my life for the better. And I went from that negative, cynical guy, critical guy, to being more open, more connected to my heart, mm-hmm. more connected. What I found out with my business is my critical self was driving the people away from me that I needed to succeed. Mm. And so people say, you went to the seminar and then everything changed. That's not true. But what changed was I found myself still being critical with people, but it was like a missile. I could see the words landing on them and blowing them up. That sounds crazy, but it was vivid to me. And so my first step in self-improvement was to shut up. I later learned I actually have very strong critical thinking skills, but the way they were being expressed was landing like an explosion on people and driving them away from me and not letting them see who I am. Seeing that I have fears, I have doubts, I have joy, I have all of that as a human being. I wasn't sharing that. I was sharing my judgments and critique. Mm-hmm. So my first step was to swallow the words. I literally they'd almost be out of my mouth, and I'd just go. My relationships improved the moment I did that. And then over time, my mindset started to change. When I started seeing these incredible results by being more vulnerable, being more human, being more compassionate, more caring, things that were within me but weren't being revealed. That was a big turning point. I enrolled over 400 people into the Mind Dynamics training because I did it selfishly. I discovered that with my family, with my friends, and most importantly, my sales force, that my life got better when they did the training.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I had a different level of consciousness, of course, at 27 and 28, 29, 30 years old. Anyway, that company found out about me because of my enrolling so many people in that seminar. And I got a phone call one day, and it was from the founder and chairman of Mind Dynamics, Alexander Everett. And he asked me to come out to California and meet him. And he sent me a first-class ticket, my first-class flight, actually. And when you're that age, that's a big deal.
Absolutely.
And I met this wonderful man, and 10 days later, I was president of Mind Dynamics, running the business of the business. He wrote the training, he selected the trainers, he trained them, he revised things. They did all of the content part, and I just helped with the selling, with the straightening out some of the agreements that were not working very well. And it also gave me that opportunity to go to Europe and start some companies there. Incredible experience for a young guy who had never really traveled at all. I spent 4 years there, and then ownership changed, and I resigned, and I founded a company called LifeSpring, which has gone on to be quite successful in the United States. And maybe something we could talk about today, knowing a little bit about your audience, is that after 6 months, I did not want to go to work in my own company, is a short way of saying it. And what I learned from that experience is what I do today in terms of working with owners, working with CEOs, working with investors that have major positions in companies, to help them see there's a way through that kind of a wreck, because it was somewhat of a wreck. It turned out to be the absolute best thing that could happen in my life. I went off to Asia, founded my first big company, Arc International, and where we had 7 training centers in Japan, 2 in Taiwan, 1 in Hong Kong, 1 in Manila, 1 in Seoul, 1 in Sydney, 1 on the mainland, an illegal business in mainland China at that time in Guangzhou. That was another significant movement for me and a lot of learning. But when I look back to the failure, because if I'm really being accurate, my leadership of LifeSpring was a failure. And what I learned from that empowers what I do today.
Okay. Are you open to share what the failure was about, how it came to be?
I mentioned that my book is about awareness, responsibility, and communication. And so the first thing that showed up there in terms of awareness was that I didn't have the terms purpose, vision, and values in my vocabulary. I guess maybe I knew the words, but I didn't know the deeper meaning of any of those terms. And when I was at Mind Dynamics, what I learned by leaving and by the failure at LifeSpring was that Alexander Everett lived purpose, vision, and values. Mm-hmm. He didn't talk about them. He lived it. He modeled it. In every decision that he made, in every interaction that he made, it was purposeful. It was toward a bigger vision that he had for the world, not just for our work. Mm-hmm. And it was communicated masterfully. So I've lived in Asia 23 years of my working life. And one of the great Zen sayings from Zen Buddhism is that fish don't describe water very well. Whatever we're living in, we don't see it. Mm-hmm. And so what I didn't see was that Alexander Everett handled in the Mind Dynamics company, and it was 4 hugely successful years for me and for the company. But he handled purpose, vision, and values by living it and modeling it with everyone. Mm-hmm. And I was the beneficiary of that on the business side of things. I was attracted to his purpose without even knowing what that word meant, really, mm-hmm. what it meant. I was enthralled with his vision, and I bought into it. I was selling it, in effect. And then finally, I learned so much about all forms of communication, especially listening, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And so I was the fish that didn't describe water. And when I started LifeSpring, I made an assumption that what I later now call culture was something that happened automatically. It's not automatic. And when it is, it's magical. But then as the company grows, you lose touch. You have to be able to actually explain it and teach it. And that's what was missing in LifeSpring. People had different purposes and different visions and different ways of communicating. And it all added up to a mess. Even though we opened 3 training centers within 90 days, it was growth. I'm good at growth. So it grew. Yeah. It grew, but I ended up in Chicago, Illinois, in the middle of winter in February, driving used Volkswagen, the old Beetle, the Bug. Uh-huh. And anybody that's had one of those knows that they had a lot of strengths and they were cute and a lot of great things about that car. They had the worst heater in the history of automobiles.
Yes.
So I remember clearly driving to the training center one very frosty winter morning, freezing myself inside the car and thinking, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go to the work today. I better take a look at that. Mm-hmm. What is that about? For the first time in my life, I don't want to work. It was shocking to me, but it was so clear. And so that's that awareness piece. Yeah. And then, of course, your next piece is, am I a victim of myself or of others in terms of why I don't want to go to work? Or am I willing to take personal responsibility and dig into this and find out what this is about? And fortunately, I took that choice, ended up taking a 90-day contract in Japan that turned into 12 years the first time. That was my learning, that the core foundation of a good culture, and the late Peter Drucker, the management guru, is often credited for this saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Now, I've also heard other people say it was they said that originally and that Drucker stole it, but I don't care. But I think that for the leader, in terms of wanting to get the maximum performance out of a team, I have a belief that the only role that is unique to a CEO, to an owner, is to facilitate the creation, the communication, and most importantly, the maintenance of a commonly held purpose, vision, and values. And I've added strategic intent. What are we really up to here? And is it consistent with our strategy? Everything else can and should be delegated. And when you're small, that's hard to do because you're doing everything. Mm-hmm. But that should be one of your early goals, is to get to the place where other people are doing the operating and you're paying attention to the culture. You could call it a high performance culture. You call it anything you want. Mm-hmm. Or you call it something that works.
That resonates with everybody. Yeah.
And people have very complicated definitions of culture. Mine is very simple. It's the way things are done around here.
Yes.
But it has a different meaning than just motivating your team. It's for me, many of my clients are in a place of success. Frankly, I don't get hired by losers. I'm getting hired. I'm hired by already successful people who are looking for something more. Maybe that more is personal, highly personal, and more sometimes it's business. Quite often it's business that masquerades what they really want in terms of their personal life, in my experience. But for the individual, that purpose, vision, and values piece comes first before the organizations. And so in the training and mentoring role that I jump into, that's what I pay most attention to first. So, and now I've talked too much.
No, it's been a very interesting point of view on how you've experienced all those different steps. And I agree with what you're saying about having a clear vision and a purpose for your organization. And I've worked with people, actually with somebody who has the same last name as you have. His name was Paul White instead of Robert White. And he was an Englishman. And later I learned that he was actually a freelancer within the company that I worked for. But nobody ever knew that he was a freelancer. He was so passionate and vividly involved with everything that nobody noticed that he was actually somebody external. And he gave us such purpose with our teams. So I was in IT at the time. It was a law firm, a UK-based law firm, where I was located in Brussels and managed 5 different countries at that time with different teams. And he had a beautiful vision of how IT support should have been done. And he was actually, what I now have as a daily mission for myself is being of service to others. I carried that with me after all these years. And it's not that I'm doing IT support anymore. Honestly, no, thank you. Been there, done that. No, thank you. It's been fun. Not anymore. But what I've learned indeed is he could enter a room and we all knew that it was going to be about being of service. That was the bottom layer, the fundamental story of any meeting was, how can we be of service and be better in the service that we have and become even better than what we were thinking we need to do. So he was always going that extra step higher in delivering. And to all of us, it was like a normal. And like you said, I remember the saying, one fish asks the other fish, how's the water? And that always comes to mind when they say this. And yeah, I was that fish who didn't know what to answer, because it was just part of the DNA and the mission of that team to give the lawyers such good service that they didn't even notice that we were there. That was his goal. Be of service, be as good as you can be, but they shouldn't notice you. And that kind of drove the whole team. For 4 years, I worked there, and I had a wonderful time. Traveled around Europe for several different things, actually doing things behind closed doors so nobody would notice that there was an issue. That was one of the ways of tackling it. And we solved a lot of problems that nobody ever knew. And that's what I still do now. I currently run a team with 15 people now and there's regularly moments that we see stuff come up and it's like, okay, let's tackle this. And then later on, we'll tell our bosses. And then, okay, we had this and this issue. And now she already knows. So my direct knows, okay, how fast did you solve this one?
Yes.
And I find that's one of the reasons I should be in my position. Avoid issues for the people that I work for. And on the other hand, I find it very nice to hear from you as well that how you can learn from your previous engagements or even the things that you've built and start to notice in yourself what the issue is. It's you. Basically, sometimes it's the leader themselves that are the issue, but they don't know because, again, how's the water? In our case, how's the air? I have a lot of people that I talk to, and so they're CEOs and founders, and they are struggling and they see all these symptoms where their team is not talking to them straight off, or they're showing them nice numbers, putting everything in green, while the bottom line is so red that everybody almost kills themselves, to be blunt. And then they're asking me, what's happening? What's wrong with my company? And I'm like, honestly, I'm one for radical truth. Radical truth is this: you're the problem. And they don't want to hear this, of course. That's the first shock. But then you start explaining what's going on. And I find what you're saying with the culture, I really relate with what you're saying. I always tackle it a little bit different, but I really relate with what you're saying. Indeed, there is how we do stuff. Indeed. And what I hate is, and hate is a heavy word, but what I do not like is when they say, we've done it all, we've always done it this way, so we're going to keep on doing it. That kind of blocks with me. No, that doesn't feel right. You can say this is how we do it here. I'm fine with that, but don't say we're going to keep on doing it that way, because then the growth mindset is all out the door. But I can relate with some of the things that you're saying. Yeah.
I've certainly noticed what could be described in the bigger culture, in the world culture, today could be described as chaotic, as just crazy. And so as human beings, and particularly in leadership roles, our job is to stay calm and stay clear, stay centered during a period of great chaos. And chaos is a more dramatic form of simply the word change. And we have such a rapid rate of change today. It shows up for us, I think, most obviously in technology. You and I can have this conversation halfway around the world, and then we can reach people anywhere in the world. I've been working on some videos that are going to be, by using AI, are going to be available in 100 languages. It's just amazing. But that's so radically different than even just 5 years ago. And for us as leaders to think that we don't need to change, even though everything's changing. Family dynamics are changing. Community dynamics are changing. Certainly corporate structures are changing. Financing is changing. Everything is changing so fast. For us to think that we can do what we did 5 years ago, 20 years ago, and do it the same way is ludicrous. It's a joke. We need to change, and we need to get more aware, take even more personal responsibility, and become even better communicators if we're going to enjoy the benefits of leadership and the value to society of good leaders, and drive leadership down into the organization so that it's not just the people at the top. I love what you said earlier about not sharing with some of the people at the top what you're really up to. I think I have very few regrets, and I have a couple of stories about that, and we'll save them for a later time. But I made a promise to a friend of mine, the late American singer John Denver was a close friend, and we went through some tough times together. And during that time, we were living in Aspen, Colorado, and down valley from Aspen is a city called Glenwood Springs, and they have a hot springs. And they also have something called a vapor cave. It's a natural cave, and of course, all of that heat comes up through the earth, all of that humidity, which in Colorado, extra humidity is a welcome thing sometimes. So you go there and you sit for a couple of hours and you cook. And then you go take a shower and have a nice lunch. And then you go back and cook some more, and then maybe you have a massage, and then you cook some more, and you talk. So we were talking about problems. And one of the things that came up was, first of all, that God would not have presented these problems to us unless there was an awareness that something was within us that we needed to learn and that we were ready for it. And one of the things that came out of that is we made a promise to each other that we would live a life of no regrets to the greatest degree possible, that we would make better choices so that we don't generate regret. And one of the things that came out of that for me was I retired at 46, Nico. Okay. I moved to Aspen, Colorado. I worked part-time. I skied 60, 70 days a year. I reached 80 days one year. I remarried and had 4 children, two birth children, 2 adopted children. And I was a more involved dad than I'd ever been. I was on 6 nonprofit boards. I traveled the world with John Denver, presenting a program about creating a sustainable environment. It was an incredible time. And I started waking up each morning. I don't know the exact translation of measurements because in America we still use square feet. Yes. But I think it was about, the home that I built there was about 1,600 square meters. And people teased me that it looked like a hotel. And I bought a jet, and I did all these things that the poor kid raised in poverty and all that from the wrong side of the tracks, is the American expression, is where we literally lived on the wrong side of the tracks, of the railroad tracks. And everything that I ever imagined and things I hadn't even imagined came true for me in terms of my family and all the physical stuff and being on 6 nonprofit boards of directors and traveling and just having a great life. And I started waking up each morning thinking, God is not done with me.
Okay.
It was. I absolutely hated it. And I literally would have an internal conversation. Everything's so good. Why isn't it I'm not just enjoying it? Why am I waking up thinking there's something in my future? And actually, when traveling with my friend John, we would do the presentation, the sustainability presentation one night, and he would do a concert the next night, or the reverse of that.
Yeah.
And we travel. Well, when he'd do a concert, there's 10 or 15,000 people there, and he comes off stage at 11 o'clock, and he's wide awake. I'm getting ready for bed. He's all excited. So that's how those conversations got started and went into the night. And in one of them, he went silent. And then he looked at me and he said, Robert, you think you're a big deal.
Okay.
I said, come on, where are you going with this? And he said, no, he said, you actually are a big deal and you've made a big contribution in the world and to me, and I treasure all of that. He said, but you haven't done anything compared to what you're going to do in the future. It's like, I just was thinking that this morning and I didn't tell anybody.
Stay out of my mind.
Yeah. How did you know that? And he said at the time, he said, you have a voice. And then he teased me. He said, it's not a singing voice, but you do have a voice and you have something to say, and you need to look at what is it that you're not saying. And I don't know, Nico, I don't know if you've done any of the body therapies, but I've done a few of them. And one of the things I learned is that when I'm holding back something, I literally feel it in my jaw. Okay. It tenses up. And it can actually get to the point of being painful. And that's what John was speaking to as a friend, is that I had something to say and I wasn't saying it. I'm holding it back. And when I look at some of my clients who have been really quite successful, many of them, they all work hard. They're all smart. They're just amazing people. But they don't spend as much time, I think, as they need to on why am I here? What is my purpose? What is my vision personally? And that Our approach is to look at three things. Life kind of seems to show up to me in multiples of three.
Mm-hmm.
But in the key work that I do with leaders, the first step is always completing the past, dealing with blame, shame, regret, guilt, and even past success. Because to the degree that, and all leaders have those things, have happened, that we're human beings, and what we're good at is compartmentalizing, at stuffing them down.
Yeah.
But they're still there. We wonder why we keep hiring the wrong person or firing the wrong person or running into the same set of problems. And quite often it's rooted in the past, in something that we've buried, that we've compartmentalized. We had this president, Bill Clinton, who was a brilliant politician, and he was an absolute expert at compartmentalizing. He had this crazy personal life, and then he had this amazing public life. And somehow he kept the two separate until it blew up on him, in a really big way.
In a big way, yes.
But he's a pretty good example of what happens when you don't deal with your past. So that's the first step when I'm working with a client, is to assist them in reducing some of the negative energy on their past, and also to see that the past is not the present, even though that's what we tend to want to do, is to take our past and throw it into the future and call that a vision. It's not, at least it's not one that's freely chosen. The second piece is to learn to better tell the truth about your current reality. And that's that awareness and noticing thing. Successful people, in my experience and in my experience of myself, we live in a story that we tell about ourselves and about what we're up to. And we're pretty good at telling the story, and that attracts people, and that builds businesses, and that gets us married, and that gives us a role in the community, and lots of good things. But that same story can be self-serving, or it can be too humble. There's a lot of things that can be out of alignment with your story. So learning to better tell the truth about your current reality is one way to say it. The Buddhists say that it's developing a selfless regard for your reality. To get your ego out of the way and see the truth.
Detach from what is.
I haven't taken a lot of formal vacations, but one that I did was on a small cruise ship. It was just 52 suites on this boat with 60 staff. This was a very nice, it's like being on a private yacht. But one of the people that I knew from living in Aspen was a guy that had 5 major homes, including one of them was in Aspen. He was worth $4 billion US. And I'm not telling a tale out of school. He was a very public figure. His name was Melvin Simon, Simon. And the Simon Property Group today owns more property than any other company in America. They own these huge shopping centers. They own office buildings all over the place. And his son actually runs that business today. Mel passed away about 5 years ago. But Mel and I really bonded on that trip. We were both business guys that never took a vacation. So we talked business mostly. Reality for Mel was he had 5 children from 3 marriages. And he was, to some degree, estranged from his own children. And 2 of the 5 had serious drug addiction issues. One of them actually died of an overdose. And he compartmentalized those things. And that ended up not well. Not so public because he could afford to keep things private. But when I look at my friend Mel in the last few years of his life, here's a guy with $4 billion of net worth and a high level of unhappiness. And what that comes from is having a story that isn't real, but you tell it like it is. So, and then finally, if you've cleared your past and completed it to some degree, if you're getting better at telling the truth about your reality instead of telling your story, or let's say living a better story, one that really serves you and humanity, then you get to choose your future. You're not dealing with old stuff. And doing that work with senior people is tremendously gratifying for me because that's been my process.
Yeah.
And the process of many successful people that I've studied. I really look at people that are in this mid-career place. They've done well. They could go lay on the beach, and then something tells them they should not go lay on the beach, or they should not just play golf, that there's something more for them. And that something more might be in a nonprofit. It might be in a radical transformation of their business. Are you familiar with Dan Sullivan?
Why does the name does ring a bell?
He founded a company called Strategic Coach. And I was a student or participant, whatever you call it, in Strategic Coach for 2 years. And I learned a lot from there. And he has a recent book that he co-authored called 10X.
Yes.
10 and the letter X. And his statement is that 10X, multiplying your business by 10, is easier than multiplying it by 2. And again, it would take us a whole day to talk about that. But it's about a consciousness shift for already successful people. If you're struggling with some little startup, and maybe it's got a great future, but if that's where you are, it's not a time to talk about 10X. It's time to make enough money to pay the payroll at the end of the month. But if you've got a business that's done well and you've done well and you've sourced it, and you're wondering about your future, I think that's something to consider. Now, I found the book a little difficult to read, but that doesn't actually, if you get the title, if you really get the title, I think it's got incredible value to think about. I wonder if there's something more that's in my future and that I would have fun doing it. And it would work for me, for my family, for my community, and for the world. And I think that's possible. And the people I work with are starting to resonate with that and doing some amazing things. I have a sense that's true for you and your team.
Thank you. Thank you for that compliment. I openly and gladly receive it because indeed I am working on that and that part of the story now. Yeah. I do understand what you mean by those three steps that clearly clean up the place and make it possible to open up for more opportunity. Indeed. And I think in all fairness, there is a path that everybody needs to walk first before they come to that point where they can clean up the past and be very truthful with themselves. How's the water or how's the air? That's a beautiful metaphor right there. And then indeed see where their arrow can be pointed, but not one, but just empty up the quiver and shoot them all at once because you're probably gonna be able to catch the target anyway. Robert, you've got so much wisdom and experience in your story. I think we could listen to you for hours because there's so much what you can bring to us. I would love to re-invite you in the future when you've had another couple of visits to Asia. Or aren't you going there shortly? Is that maybe just a little break and then going back, or what's the plan?
I'm not going to live there again. I've become spoiled by being in a country that's my country, that kind of ease. But I'll be going back in September for another 3 weeks to do some trainings, connect with people, and contribute what I can. I got a phone call this morning from a Chinese friend who doesn't speak very good English. And also, I have a sense he had a few glasses of wine before he called me.
he had to drink up the courage to talk English, maybe.
When he called me, it was 1 a.m. his time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I asked him twice, "Why did you call me?" And he really didn't answer. I don't think he knows why he called me. But what was interesting was that he's up to something. He's building electric car charging stations all over China. He's an amazing entrepreneur. He's the typical entrepreneur, like 5 different businesses going at once. But that's been his big one, is to install hundreds of these charging stations all over China. But what came through in the call was that when I went to Asia this last trip, I did not go to mainland China. And he found out about that, and he didn't like that I made that choice.
Oh,
And it's really about our need to sit down with people that we can resonate with and just have a conversation and have it be real. Not about some sports team, not about all of these distractions,
no,
but
indeed.
about real stuff, about getting real with each other. And most leaders that I work with are lonely. They know they can't, it doesn't work very well to have close friends in your company.
No.
I think that's rare. It rarely works. And so who do you talk to? Your wife has a different world, or your husband has a different world that you do in leading your company. And the people, when you're standing on the sidelines for your son's soccer match, the people you meet there, they're great and they're fun and it's wonderful socially. But who do you talk to? And having that network of people around you that have some understanding of the challenges and the rewards of organizational leadership, I think that's priceless. And what I realized when I got off the phone this morning was I missed that. I missed that opportunity to be with a superstar entrepreneur. He's a graduate of one of my programs. That's how we got to know each other. But I missed that opportunity, and he was gently letting me know that it was not okay with him.
Your destinations. That's good.
But I think that's one of the things that podcasting is helping us with is we get to listen in on some really fascinating conversations. And
yeah, absolutely.
So it's really why when I found out about you and about this show, I thought, yeah, I might fit there and I might have a good conversation. Thank you for that.
Oh, I'm so happy that you accepted my invitation as well and wanted to join, because absolutely, that's one of the things that I've focused on. Is I started off as being a coach years ago. And one of the things that I know and learned as being coach is that you ask questions to get people somewhere. And that somewhere can be a breakthrough, can be change, can be whatever. And I use all different kinds of methodologies that I've learned over the years. I'm 45 years old, but I started working from 19, and I built everything from the ground up to where I am right now. I did 15 different jobs, and I had teams of 300 people as well. So I had all these I was cable guy, so really pulling cables at the beginning of my career, driving forklifts, sitting in offices with big chiefs and C-levels and whatever. I've done all that in my career. And we cannot emphasize this enough, is that how lonely it is to be a leader. If you're a really good leader, it is a lonely place to be, because you're driving so many layers in a company towards a good goal or a good mission or a good vision. And that's indeed a difficult one to talk to. And I've been looking for years to find counterparts to have these conversations. And I've noticed that indeed in this podcast, there's a lot of people that I talk to whom I will be contacting again just to have those conversations, because it's sometimes you miss the little differences in point of view, where when you ask the questions. So for instance, let's play this off. If I would contact you in a half a month time or in a few months time and say, Robert, I got this thing going on. Do you have any tips for me or any experiences? And you'll probably be able to go right into the pain of saying, Nick, you're actually doing this wrong. And I will be able to accept it because I know that it comes from a good place. And that's where I think as well, that's why I switched over to calling myself a confidant, because it's the relationship and the safe space of getting into those conversations and talking about the real deep pain, but not for putting extra salt on it. It's never
Right.
good. Or reopening the wound to get the bullet out might be healthy, but it's not so pleasant. But in essence, it's to get through that pain. And on the other side, there's always sunshine after the rain.
Absolutely. Look, if the book is available, if people have an interest, it's in the bookstores, it's on Amazon, or if you want a signed copy, go to therobertwhite.com. It's for sale on my site. But one of my daughters says, Dad, you think you're such a big deal. You're just a book salesman at this point in your life.
There's a lot of love in that statement.
Yeah. educated them to be independent thinkers, and unfortunately they are.
You've done well.
But I do a weekly e-zine called An Extraordinary Minute. It's some idea that I heard from somebody like my friend Nick, and with my comments on it, all designed to be read in 1 minute or less once a week.
Okay.
So it's free, and you can go to therobertwhite.com and you'll get that. There's also a 28-page PDF that a lot of leaders have said it's been very valuable to them. It's what I've learned about success at every level, all in 28 pages PDF, and it's shareable. So you can share it with your team. So stay in touch. That's for you, Nick, and for your listeners. Who knows where that might lead?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. People contact Robert, because I think you might learn a lot in a very short time. And thank you, Robert, again for joining us today. I will leave your website link in the show notes. So people, when you're on your phone, just click the link and check out the website right now. And when you've done with Robert, go over to my website and check out my website as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
I've got a new friend on the other side of the world. So, Nick, I've enjoyed it. Thank you for great questions. Thank you for your friendship.
Likewise, Robert. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Everlasting Podcast. Let me leave you with a few questions to answer in the comments. How do you see the different topics we discussed during this interview? What are your thoughts? What stood out for you? Let us know in the comments or just send us your feedback. We launch new episodes weekly. Don't miss any by ensuring you are subscribed to the show. Click the follow button now. We depend on the organic growth of the podcast to inspire more and more people. So by giving us a 5-star review and sharing this episode with at least one of your friends who might be interested in the subject, you will significantly help more people become inspired. But more than anything, I am grateful to you for taking the time to listen to the show. If you are also a successful CEO, founder, or entrepreneur who has inspiring words to say, feel free to contact us for an interview at contact@nicovandevenne.com. Thank you for listening. We will see you again soon with more inspirational conversations on achieving everlasting fulfillment.